Hi, everybody. Let's get started. My name's Bob Pasnau. Thank you very much for coming. I am professor in the philosophy department here at CU Boulder and the director of the Center for Western Civilization, Thought, and Policy. My fellow panelist is Patti Limerick, professor of history and the director of the Center for the American West. Patti and I have both been engaged in these issues for some time. Patti, I should say, much longer than me. She established a reputation for bipartisanship, I guess is a good term, before I was even on this campus. I'll look forward to hearing her remarks about this. But let me start. The topic is a question. Does the university need conservative voices? And we very much want to have a dialogue. We'll be leaving plenty of space for questions and discussion. And we very much welcome candid expressions of concerns or viewpoints, as well as just questions about what it is that my center's up to, or what Patti's trying to do, or what the university's trying to do. And we'll address those as best we can. I'm going to talk for 10 to 15 minutes, and then Patti will say what she wants to for similar length of time, and then we'll throw it open for discussion. My thesis is pretty simple. It's that the university has committed itself to what it calls inclusive excellence. And it defines inclusive excellence as follows. It goes like this. The University of Colorado Boulder exemplifies excellence through diversity by 1, creating a welcoming and inclusive environment, 2, deepening our ability to share and to engage with diverse perspectives, 3, maximizing the success and inclusion of all students, staff, and faculty. End quote. Now, officially, diversity in this statement includes cultural differences, religious or spiritual beliefs, political affiliation, or political philosophy. Yet, and here we come to my thesis, yet, when it comes to conservative voices, as well as many religious values and cultural differences, the university has abjectly failed even to make a decent effort at achieving such diversity. Now, let me try to talk through the case I want to make for that conclusion and some of the conclusions I want to draw in 3 parts. First of all, I'll say some things about demographics, then I'll say some things about impacts, and then I'll say some things about responses. So first, demographics. According to a 2014 survey, some 16% of our students identify as Republicans. And that's a pretty small number. It's not perhaps as small as it might seem relative to the population at large, in as much as 16% isn't so much lower than the 21% statewide between the ages of 25 who are registered Republicans. Moreover, a statistic like this to some extent understates the extent to which students may stand out relative to the larger community due to various sorts of intellectual diversity, religious, ethical, cultural, that may coincide with a political affiliation, but needn't. So there are a lot of students we're talking about, and there are a lot of staff and a lot of faculty too, although faculty numbers are, of course, famously smaller. Now, it really shouldn't need to be said at this point, but I fear it probably does, that conservatives aren't dumb, they're not ignorant, they're not selfish, they're not greedy. Well, some of them are, but, some liberals are too. There's powerful arguments, moreover, powerful arguments in favor of conservative principles. And if that strikes any of you as unlikely, that there are powerful arguments in favor of conservative principles, then that's a strong indication that you yourself need more conservative voices in your education and your life. Now, to some extent, it seems to me, conservatives are simply born that way. As someone who's spent a lifetime teaching about the fundamental sort of values that define the left and the right, I can tell you that different people are simply inclined in different ways on these subjects. And at a certain point, arguments between the two sides do run out. It's always felt to me as if there's just kind of, on many topics, a kind of fundamental orientation that people have. University educators, I think, sometimes seem to think of themselves as offering some kind of conversion therapy treatment for conservative students. But I can tell you that that sort of thing is as little likely to bear fruit with regard to conservative students as the analogous treatments are for LGBTQ folk. Now, the university does virtually nothing for this large group of students. Although, as I've noted above, official university statements of diversity mention political, philosophical, and religious diversity, as they must, according to law. In fact, for instance, the new draft of the Campus Diversity Plan says not a word about this form of diversity, or about the difficulties that such students might face on the Boulder campus. So far as I know, moreover, there are no initiatives on campus aimed at these students, aside from my own center. And my center exists, I should say, only because it's wholly privately funded. This is not to say, now let me hasten to add, this is not to say that the folk who work on diversity initiatives, like the people behind this summit, are hostile to these sorts of issues. On the contrary, in my experience, these folk have been warmly receptive whenever my center has proposed collaborative initiatives. And our appearance here on the agenda of this summit is a perfect example of that sort of thing. So it's not as if I feel as if there's outright hostility to this kind of diversity, but it's just that aside from the Center for Western Civ, there's no systematic campus effort being made to address these issues. Okay, that's part one. Now on to impacts. These issues do need dealing with. In a recent national poll, over half of college students surveyed reported that their instructors, quote, often, unquote, expressed their own social or political views in ways completely unrelated to the subject of the course. So that's over half say that their professors do that. Moreover, over half reported that they often felt intimidated in sharing their views in class. Now, admittedly, this poll was done at the behest of a conservative campus group. But imagine that in these results, imagine if you replaced the political content with some sort of content pertaining to race or gender. We would all find even a tenth of these results deeply problematic. But when it comes to political harassments and problems about political hostility, we tend to be unconcerned. I asked a few of the students associated with the center to give me their impressions of life on campus, and I got some hair-raising responses. One student described sitting through many classes, and here are his words, in which the TA or professor feels that they have failed the class if conclusions don't fall in favor of progressive or far-left stances. This same student, after offering a long inventory of particular classroom examples, the student concluded that, quote, CU Boulder, in its attempt to avoid discrimination at all costs, has been actively discriminating against the forgotten conservative student. Another student related the following incident, and let me just quote a few sentences here. She said, I work at the resident halls at the front desk. Last week I had a student come to the desk to report harassment by her 3 roommates who were leaving nasty notes on her desk saying she was racist, white supremacist, and deplorable without hope of redemption for being conservative. The roommates would listen to her phone calls with her family and then take what she said out of context and start spreading the ideas that she was not a person worth knowing to other residents. When she came to report this, she said, I've been living here 2 months and I have no friends, and I am so alone. Similar sorts of issues can arise for faculty or staff. A month ago, I wrote to a young political scientist at Sarah Lawrence College, congratulating him on a piece he'd written for the New York Times, documenting the extent to which student-facing administrators are, in his words, the most left-leaning group on campus. He didn't reply, and I figured, well, he's just too famous now that he's in the New York Times to be corresponding with the likes of me. But then a couple of weeks later, I got this reply. He said, hi, Bob. I didn't know him previously, but it was a very friendly email. He said, hi, Bob. I'm so sorry for the delay in writing you. After the piece came out, my office was vandalized and my family was threatened. When I circulated this response with some folk affiliated with my center, one young scholar here remarked, unbelievable, all of this. It sincerely makes me question what I'm doing in academia. So, now on to my final section, responses. Faculty are regularly invited to attend training sessions addressing myriad forms of diversity on campus. I recently learned, for instance, that if I attend an LGBTQ training session, I can get a little plaque to put on my office door. Now, all of this seems great to me. Indeed, I want one of those plaques. But we should be giving the same kind of attention to political diversity, because those students face threats of the same kind and magnitude as do students coming from diverse backgrounds of other sorts. Indeed, to use the currently fashionable terminology, there's a great deal of intersectionality between the sorts of diversity the university already cares about and the sorts of intellectual diversity I'm highlighting. As a matter of demographics, students who are more conservative politically or culturally, or who are more religious, are more likely to come from rural communities, more likely to be first-generation college students, and more likely to come from more modest socioeconomic backgrounds. These are kinds of diversity we already care about, and that we recognize as posing obstacles to success in college. What I'm calling for, then, would simply enrich efforts to which we're already committed. There's every reason to think that attention to these issues would improve our ability to recruit strong students from around the state and would increase our retention rates with respect to those students. It would, moreover, as a purely strategic matter, just pragmatically speaking, it would be a wise investment for the various diversity efforts on campus to care about these issues, inasmuch as the work they do is liable otherwise to be branded, at least by uncharitable observers, as highly partisan in nature. So these sorts of initiatives, I think, would help with that perspective. Quite apart from the good that would come to students, staff, and faculty who don't feel they are part of the welcoming and inclusive environment we're aiming for, empowering conservative voices on this campus would be good for all of us. Students who go through their college education without exposure to what a serious and forceful conservative voice sounds like, they're failing to get the education they deserve. Faculty, graduate student instructors, and students as well need to understand that inclusive pedagogy extends to the political domain, and they need to be trained to encourage and foster conservative voices in the classroom. These views need to be given a full and respectful hearing, not stigmatized or mocked. If we cannot do this within our own university, then what hope is there that the nation at large will emerge from its currently divided and acrimonious state? Now, finally, despite everything I've said, I know that some will be thinking that conservative voices hardly need our protection here at CU, when throughout so much of our culture, they are the dominant and ruling voices of authority. But even if conservatives at large are hardly a persecuted and powerless minority, they still very much have that status within the microcosm of our own campus. No doubt, in other contexts, conservative voices need no protection. But if you're 18 years old, alive with ideas, enthusiasm, and ambition, and you've come to this university because it's the only world-class education to be had within 800 miles of your home, it's hardly any comfort to be told that there are plenty of other places where conservatives can thrive. Our students, all of our students, deserve to thrive here. Thank you.
I wouldn't have wanted to miss that. That was remarkable. I'm going to speak more about my personal experience and how this changed. The reason why I have been involved in this cause for so much longer than Bob is that I am so much older than Bob. Let's just say that it's not that he was a late starter. He just started late on the planet, I guess, for that. And I have had quite a number of years of adventure. I will say that humor is part of the operations of the Center of the American West, and that might seem a little bit kind of a mismatch with the seriousness of the issues we just heard, but I will say that one of our best friends at the Center of the American West and our favorite visitor is former Republican Senator Alan Simpson from Wyoming, who is probably the funniest person on the planet. If you get a voicemail from him, you cannot delete it because it makes you laugh hard every time you hear it. So there's a person who has used humor in ways that I think are an endless inspiration for us, and certainly a person who has been lionized when he's been here on campus as a conservative, because he is such a, every second in his company is a pleasure, and it's partly because you don't know what he's going to say next, and you know it will be wild. His usual voicemail is, if you get a message from him, it'll be, "This is the Reverend Alan K. Simpson from the Church of Flames Pastorage," or something. That's not who you are. Why are you saying that? But it gets you laughing, and then you don't stop there. I shouldn't have used that particular example because he seems to have been making fun of religion now, which he never really does. Anyway, so I will tell you quickly the before and after story of myself. I went to college in 1968, University of California, Santa Cruz. I was active in protests there. I went to graduate school at Yale in 1972. I certainly found the dominant understanding of Western American history to be inflexible and one-sided. I wrote a book that came out in 1987 called The Legacy of Conquest, The Unbroken Past of the American West. One of its primary missions was to call attention to the prior presence of Spanish, French, Russian people in the American West, and of course, even more than that, the Native American people in the West. So for a while, I was quite, I don't know what, not a poster child, but quite a signifier of the move from the left in the field of the West. And I was kind of lionized for that, and it was pretty fun. And then, as I sometimes put it, I used to be contentious and controversial in that early phase, and then I became congenial and collaborative. And that has been a bitter disappointment for quite a number of the people who stayed on the more liberal side of things. I was able to make a transition for one internal reason, which was that I myself was confused about political programs, political undertakings that had made perfect sense to me in 1968, but which did not seem to be holding up so well in the world as I moved through time. So I wasn't entirely certain what category I would give for myself at a certain point if I had to choose any of the available forms of political distinction. Also, this is probably the most important for my personality and character, I was bored. I went to dinner parties. I was almost always in the company of academics. I hardly knew anybody outside universities. I should say I was an assistant professor at Harvard before I came here. I would be at dinner parties, and I would have something I was going to say about contemporary issues, and before I could say it, someone else at the dinner party would say it before I could. I would think, well, that was quite an insightful remark, but it was supposed to be for me. So that was going poorly over time. It seemed boring to be at dinner parties where we all chanted a similar litany. So I became restless, and I wanted to see what would happen if I could widen my circles. But how was I supposed to widen my circles? Various things came to my aid. I was invited to join Rotary. Still am a Rotarian. My attendance is very bad. Let's not look at that, but I pay my dues, and I'm proud to be a Rotarian. I remember one occasion when former Senator Gary Hart was speaking to Boulder Rotary, which is a very big club, and it is in Boulder, but Gary Hart, as a joke, stood up and said to my Rotary club, "Good afternoon, fellow Republicans." Excuse me. "Good afternoon, fellow Democrats." And maybe 7 people went, "Woo!" and the rest sort of, "Where do you think you are?" So I very much appreciated that. Some of the wildest conversations I've ever had in my life are when my fellow Rotarians have asked me to explain academic administration and the chain of command, the chain of command, what is a chancellor, what is a vice, well, anyway, they give up after a few minutes and ask for another topic. So I enjoyed that very much, just the social contacts across that border. And then a couple of experiences really transformed me. I was on the committee for advising student affairs on campus, and it was largely alumni and many business people and 2 or 3 faculty. We started at one meeting, this would have been in the late 90s, on a discussion of affirmative action. It was not on our agenda, but we started to have an argument about affirmative action. I could see that it wasn't going to go well. We weren't prepared for that conversation. I had a friend, I'd made one friend on that committee that I knew pretty well, and he was very much a self-identified conservative. So as we headed towards conversational calamity, I jumped in and I said, "I have a better idea. Let's have a debate on affirmative action at our next meeting. I will, Dick Brown and I, he's fine about my using his name, an alumni of the university, Dick and I will debate, and to show how fun universities are, we'll switch positions. He'll take my side, and I'll take his side." "Okay, Dick?" And he said, "Okay." Then, within hours, we were thinking, oh, man, whose idea was that? Well, it happened to be mine, but he agreed to it. So we started doing something that I don't think anybody else in the United States was doing at that time. We started having lunch and listening to each other's positions because we had to speak them in our debate. So we sat taking notes on each other's repellent positions, and then the positions became less repellent because we would ask follow-up questions. We would say, "Now, why would you prefer that means of progress?" And we would talk about that. And then it turned out by many conversations, we had reached an understanding that we shared many of the same goals, and we were on pretty different sides about how to get to those goals. So for our presentation to the committee, We had said all along we would do Act 1, in which we would speak each other's parts, and Act 2, where we wouldn't bother to script it, but we'd just say what we really thought and how hard it was to speak for the other side. So, note, we didn't script Part 2. So we came into our committee, we presented very pleasurably, we presented each other's point of view. Then we said, and now we are going to do Part 2, where we say what we really think and what we found very hard to say when we were speaking for the other person. And the sound that you're hearing is what we heard. Silence. And then I said, Dick, do you want to start? And he said, well, I don't really feel that I need to. I said, well, I don't really either. Then the befuddled committee said, did you convert each other? What happened here? We said, no, but we just don't have any need to go back and insist on something that the other person already said for us. And we do have this feeling that we have a shared goal and we have different ways of getting there. So Act 2 was about, minute and a half, and still has not occurred over the 25 years of a great friendship. So that was one experience that was transformative. Then I got quite interested. I've always been interested in the Department of the Interior in the West, and the idea came up that we should have a series where we would bring the former secretaries of the Interior for visits with the university, sponsored by the Center of the American West. So at that point, I probably was still enough in transition that I had to breathe deeply and speak sternly to myself and say, as an historian, you will be inviting all the former secretaries. You will not, as an historian, have any standing if you only invite the secretaries whose work at Interior you found a particular delight to contemplate. So, if you're thinking this through, you'll notice that I am now going to have to make overtures to a number of figures who are not going to want to come to Boulder. So I had to make overtures to Reagan's former Secretary of the Interior, James Watt, who says that his children thought his first name was controversial, since it almost always said the controversial James Watt. He was not interested in coming to Boulder, which he thought would be a place where the majority would be hostile to him. But we would have, 25-minute phone conversations. And at the end of each phone conversation, I would say, I hope you will come to Boulder. And he would always say, no, I won't, but I enjoy the conversations. And so I said, well, I'll call again and I'll see if I can be more persuasive. So probably 11 to 14 of those conversations. And then very suddenly one day, my phone rang and he said, this is Jim Watt, I've had a change of heart and I'll come. So I came to Boulder, and he had a very nice time. Some really interesting parts of that story that I hope someone will ask questions about. And then that had gone so well that I thought, let's take an additional step. So for the 25th anniversary, or I guess the 20th anniversary of the founding of the center, we brought James Watt to spend 2 days with Kennedy and Johnson's former Secretary of the Interior, Stuart Udall. So I will say, when you were driving to the airport to pick up Stuart Udall and Jim Watt, you do think, whose idea was this? And it was remarkable. It was a great experience and one I'll never forget. So those are various experiences that I had that made me think I would never want to go back to the uniform conversations at dinner parties. I would never want to be in that world. It's what you've said for the students is true for the faculty, that our minds need that exercise. And again, I would say right now, I don't actually have a category that I can claim for myself and occupy with ease. I feel far more hybrid and mixed in orientation than I would know what to do with if I tried to put it into a category. Now I'm going to tell a couple of stories that back up some of the points here. So out of all this, I did decide, though I had spent years denying this, but I quit denying it, that there is a liberal orthodoxy on campuses. There is that. And I, every once in a while, set off an alarm that made it clear that I was probably on the right track with that. At a chancellor's breakfast, maybe 20 years ago, I made a remark about individualism in academic in the academic world, I remarked that there were probably more conservatives in science departments and engineering departments, and yet there was more collaborative and cooperative enterprise. Scientists and engineers do tend to work together. Humanities, there would be far more liberals who were very critical of individualism as a stance, and yet if you wanted to see individualism wholeheartedly practiced, you should leave the sciences and come to the humanities. Well, that made me incredibly popular. By the time I got to my office, there was this firestorm among I think it was almost all the humanities chairs were corresponding about the remarks that Limerick had made that morning. And a person who had some authority over me, I guess, wrote an interesting remark that I think I have memorized. I was again more than 20 years ago. He said that in those comments, Limerick must have been trying to, well, he said that the Center of the American West must be in financial trouble, and that I must have been saying what I said for fundraising purposes, and he referred to my activity as cozying up to the GOP, that could only be explained by my needing to raise more money for the center. Sorry, this is a very indelicate next humorous remark, but it was pretty funny. I mentioned this to a friend in the biology department, and I quoted that phrase, cozying up to the GOP, and my friend, who was a biologist, said, well, could be worse references. At least there's no exchange of bodily fluids in that. So, sorry, but it was funny, and it cheered me at that time. So, that is my story. I've had experiences that, again, I will remember for all of my life, I think, which, like, for instance, leading a conversation between Republican former Senator Hank Brown and former Democratic Governor Bill Ritter, where we happened into the world of what being an elected public official can do to family members. And it became very serious about what a burden falls on spouses and children when somebody holds a public office. And I was said sort of in a public audience, but I'm not going to quote some of the stuff there, but that was such an occasion of two public figures speaking with such honesty to each other. And if there was a partisan divide in the room at that moment, I couldn't see it. So I'm going to end with a hope, which is that it's a dream. At our center, I think everyone involved with us knows that we will do everything we can and have done that for years to make sure that conservative voices get a respectful hearing. And I would say every now and then, I think I may not have been as forceful in saying to some of our conservative affiliates that means every now and then we have to bring in someone who is very left-wing. Or we look like we have just changed sides in a way that is not helpful and not productive to engaged political conversation. So I dream of an occasion where conservatives are very audible in pointing out if they are on a panel where liberals are unrepresented or feel that there should be at least one or two ranting left-wingers there just to show how shallow some thoughts can be, whatever it is, just some, I shouldn't have taken that, I'm sorry, my mockery went a little bit too far there, but I would like to have occasions where there's more expression of enthusiasm for having the company of an opposing voice. And this is my big, big dream. I dream of the University of Colorado as the site of a fierce and ferocious, no-holds-barred competition in which liberals and conservatives contest to claim leadership in congeniality and civility. Thank you.
Okay, the floor is open for questions and comments. I have a portable mic here. Let me give this one to Patti. Does this thing work? Yes. Oh, you're going to pass that one out? All right.
Yeah.
Well, if one of us has to sit down, I think.
Well, then you should sit down because
All right.
you're younger and you need to rest there. That's
Hey, Bob. I don't know if you, I don't know if you can see me. This is Alex.
Yes. Hi, Alex.
So Bob knows, full disclosure, some people might classify me as a leftist, but we're reading the National Review tomorrow in class, so that I assigned. But I have a foundational question to start with. You described that a lot of political views at the end of the day come down to just how we're born or can't be further argued.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, so often when we talk about diversity, we talk about diversity, like you say, the LGBTQ plus community or various races and classes. And those are things that aren't decided upon in the way of like, we have reasons and we choose to believe something. And before your comment, it seemed to me that political views were exactly the kind of things that we reason about and then come to decisions about. So there was a big difference there. So I'm wondering how we should look at political view, if it's something that we should look at as reasoned and we come to it, or we're born with. And it seems like either of those, here's at least two things we might want to consider. If it's something we're just born with or just there and there aren't arguments at the end of the day, it seems like our inclusivity practices should be identical to those for any of these other groups. But that also means then we shouldn't be able to discuss if these are right or wrong. We merely accept them. If political views are instead the kind of things that should come to from reason, it seems that these are exactly the kind of things we should vigorously debate and maybe let the marketplace of ideas, as people like to say, determine who's out there. And I could be wrong because I'm not considered a conservative, but it seems like any sort of affirmative action to push more conservative views seems contradictory. So I'm sure things are more complicated there, but that might be a good starting point.
Wow, that's great. In case you can't tell, Alex is a PhD student in philosophy, one of our best PhD students. He's also doing admirable work leading the fight to get better wages and benefits for graduate students. So I just wanted to give you a little shout out there. Wow, that's a lot. My picture, and you and I may disagree about this, and I may well just be wrong about this, but my picture is that when it comes to political dispute, there's a whole lot of issues that are up for grabs in terms of, first of all, just empirical questions, where if people had better empirical information, they'd form better political views. Like one kind of notorious example is that it's very widely believed that the US government gives a great deal of its budget to help people outside of the United States. In fact, it's just a tiny, minuscule bit of the budget, but people don't know that. And lots of things like that if people had better information, they'd be better informed and they'd make better political decisions. And then I think, as I have the picture I sort of have is, you kind of work your way down, and I do think at some point, maybe very far down, but at some point you just hit a kind of bedrock where people just have very different values. And I think maybe something like affirmative action is a place where you can pretty quickly get to bedrock, where some people are just willing to sacrifice on one dimension and see affirmative action as a force for the good. Other people are unwilling to sacrifice on that dimension, and so are just completely resistant to affirmative action. And in my experience, talking about that issue, I just find you quickly get to an impasse. And I guess I was thinking about that because you gave that kind of example. So if it's structured like that, and there are just these deep values that people are as it were innately inclined toward, then it does raise interesting issues about how we should think about diversity, how we should sort of think about respecting difference in these areas. I'm sure you would agree with me, Alex, that the worst thing we can do as teachers is to just think, oh, people who hold conservative views, they're just stupid. Maybe some are, but some of our students on the left are just badly informed too, and so we don't want to think that. But if we think at some level maybe you run out of place for conversation, I think there's still a real value in hearing from conservative voices, so that students on all sides of the issues understand why they're thinking the things they are. And I don't think it's reasonable to think that someone like you, Alex, who's committed on the left, that you can make the same kind of case for conservative causes that somebody can who genuinely believes in them. And again, maybe I'm thinking of the nice example you gave of switching places.
I would say that if we wanted to see a civil debate, you could ask us back where we'll talk about whether there is such a thing as intrinsic human character in individuals, because I don't agree for a moment with the notion that conservatism is a character trait that is there and is lasting and permanent and fixed. So a congenial debate sometime, because I don't believe in introverts and extroverts as stern category. I just think we don't know what we're going to be. We don't know. And to say to young people, we have given you these evaluations and assessments, and we know that you are this kind of person. I think that's a wonderful invitation to a young person to become a different kind of person there. So I'm not, sorry, Bob, and you should certainly respond, but I dispute that. Not because I am congenitally disputatious, because I didn't do that as much as a young person, and now I have quite a passion for that. So, okay, second, I just feel the discussion of reason is very interesting and very worth talking about, evidence and the presentation of evidence and so on. And it seems to me that we are headed into one of those bad zones of dichotomous polarities, where we have people who are either liberal or conservative, and I think many of them are hybrid. I would just mention Mexican-American people, some of whom are culturally very conservative on matters of same-sex marriage or family values and so on, and yet liberal in various forms of governmental involvement on behalf of equity and so on. So hybrid, that's more the pattern. So anytime when we're doing an either-or thing, I think, uh-oh, because here we were doing reason as if that were our main and only category, and if we'd gone further, we would have said reason as opposed to emotion or versus emotion, and I would say that anything involving human society and its conduct is going to be emerge from a mixture of reason and emotion. And if it's not a full reckoning with the emotion, the reason is going to be a very inadequate category of communication and persuasion. As if that makes things easy, because then you have to figure out how to conduct yourself. If you were trying to monitor yourself for the boundary between reason and emotion, if you say to the person with whom you were having a disagreement, I would say you're being very emotional now, though you're pretending to be reasonable, that conversation's gone. That person's never going to come back into a sporting relationship there. So it requires extreme care and diplomacy to maneuver through that. But no wonder reason is not sufficient, because reason is not necessarily the most powerful cognitive force at play there.
I could talk about this all day, but let's take some more questions. I'll get this one.
I guess since we're being discussed, I guess I'll stand up for the whole black community here. I need to ask you a question. What is your definition of conservative? What do you mean when you say that to me? My father was in the Air Force for 29 years. My uncle served in Vietnam. Then he started a clinic in Los Angeles. My grandfather used to cook for the soldiers at a military base in South Carolina, then took the leftover food and fed his whole community. These were not liberals. These were not guys who were out marching the streets. That would be me. I was one of those guys who took over buildings on this campus because we were tired of being put out of school here, of an administration that said we don't belong, of having professors who said that this face made our degree less valuable. So I'm trying to find out, what does that conservative mindset mean? Does it mean we got invading hordes of people coming from the South who are going to rape white girls? Does it mean that black on black crime is somehow different than crime? You understand what I'm getting at here? What is conservative? Because when it hits me, it comes out in the form of policies, procedures, and actions that have what's what I'm looking for? An adverse impact on people who look like me. That's why why I wanted to come here, talk to you guys today. I want to know, what does it mean to be conservative? Does it mean that we're going to hold up the conservative banner and this is our heritage, this is our legacy, and expect me to see the same way? Please enlighten me. What are you telling me here? What is it you're looking for?
I'm the wrong person to answer that question. I don't. It's a great question. I don't know the answer.
And I don't mean that. I don't mean to be mean-spirited.
No.
I'm really trying to get. Where are you? What is it you're looking for?
Yeah.
Because when you tell a story about feeling like a black kid, dude, I know what that feeling's like. And it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing of being physically seen from miles away and having someone have an opinion of you that you can't defend. You're talking about how you believe or what you think. We all go through that. We go through that in our own community with one another. With people think, oh, he's a nerd, or he's a this, or he's a that. You're acting too much like this or too much like that. I hear you and I feel you there. And I sympathize, and I don't think anybody should have that feeling that you have. But I just need to know, in a broader sense, what does it mean? Because I have a lot of conservatives in my family, and the only reason they vote Democrat is because of the race issue.
That's really interesting. I guess I've got to come clean at this point. I intended not to say this, but you should all know that both Patti and I are kind of leftists. And so we're kind of, we're up here making a kind of argument on behalf of folk that don't necessarily share our political views, but I might say what you just said, which is I've got a lot of family members who are conservatives. I've also learned a ton about what it is to be a conservative from directing this center, where I've had the privilege to work with a whole series of extremely smart and sophisticated folk who are card-carrying conservatives. And one thing it's taught me is what a range of viewpoints it is. You can go sort of one by one through the various conservative scholars we've had visit this campus, and each one is a conservative in a different sort of way. So last year's version was a hawk, a kind of a foreign policy hawk. That was his thing, and he championed a very aggressive foreign policy of the sort that George W. Bush had put into action. The year before that, the conservative in residence was a social conservative who was pro-life and not a friend of LGBTQ friendly policies and so on and so forth. Those were his kinds of issues. So there's a whole set of issues, and I think one of the great issues that faces the conservative movement today is that it's unclear how to tell a unifying story that brings all of those folk together. And I'm no expert on this stuff, so I'm going to stop talking in just a second, but my impression is that the conservatives have been kind of making it work for them with a kind of a shifting coalition from election to election, and obviously with Trump they went off on a pretty different kind of direction. It would be interesting if there was something to your critique, which is that what all this has in common is that they have as their enemy, folk who are coming from a background like yours. Obviously, that's not the story you'd get from somebody who was, arguing for that side.
I'm not sure that I am a leftist. I do have dramatically diminished confidence that the government can solve problems. I used to be very much of that spirit, and a lot of problems just didn't get solved, so I couldn't be denying that evidence. So I think I might have I might be stripped of the role if I were ever really X-rayed for my interior on this. I also think that the implications of policy, what happens when you pass a law, who is affected and how. I would love if we could just go for a moment of celebrating reason again, if we could have laws and policies and then convene again to say, did that deliver what we wanted, whether it was a conservative plan or a liberal plan? I would say, as a historian, it looks to me like most often the laws have all sorts of unintended consequences, and sometimes intended, but if we could deliberate on what a law produces and whether that was something that we wanted or not, that would give me such hope. We don't seem to be doing that right now, let's just say that. Okay, so we've noticed that. So then the other thing I would say is that I can't imagine a world in which we would benefit from having clear categorizations. I just I don't know what, half an hour, 5 minutes before I came into this room, I sent a message to someone recommending that we bring Jeff Flake here. Well, he's a conservative. No? Well, there's an interesting thing. Then we bring him here, and part of his visit here, we'll talk about that, because that seems very interesting to me on that. So, okay, Jeff Flake, it's too late to bring John McCain. That would have been interesting. Bob Corker. I don't know. They're just interesting people that I would very much like to have here, because I do feel that something is lost in the human soul when one group or one individual or one leader gets to define what a movement is and what it consists of. That to have a spectrum is really a good thing. And now, since we went for the honesty thing here, I am totally bewildered by our lives since November 2016. To be an ally and friend of Senator Alan Simpson was a joy. To be an ally and friend of I won't name, it would be, some of my best friends are conservatives, and it would be tedious to hear me do that. But I was so happy to be in the company of Republicans who I would joyfully vote for and embrace. And I don't know what to make of the current situation of the president's leadership. I didn't have any preparation for that. And we are all about civility at the Center of the American West, and I do not see him as complying with our practices. So that is where I will go for honesty, of just saying, you want to see one confused navigational system, I'm here for you on that. Oh, good, I have some club members here, that'll be good.
Okay, another question. Let me move back to here. Yeah, I'm coming for you.
I was wondering if you guys are familiar with the student organization Turning Point USA. They're a pretty heavy conservative body on campus. I'm not a part of the organization, so I might not be speaking on their behalf. But I was wondering what you guys could say. There was an incident over Halloween week where the organization was wearing cultural appropriation clothing, and downstairs in the UMC, they were wearing different types of headdresses and poking fun at things that truly hurt different demographics of people and routinely marginalized groups. And I'm just wondering how I, as like a campus leader and someone that's involved in student organizations on campus, how am I supposed to start dialogue with a group like Turning Point, or be inclusive of their views when they're poking fun at my friends and people who I guess I feel should have a safe space on campus and not be attacked or made fun of?
I guess since I'm sitting here with Mike, I would say what the Center of the American West practice is to make the most of historical perspective. So and also to have moderators. I think it would be very difficult. It is very difficult when two people who hold differing positions try to have a conversation. It's really hard. If you have a moderator who's setting up some ground rules, if you think we may have a trouble with head injuries in football, if we didn't have referees on the field there, what would we have but endless demands for neurosurgeons at that point? So I think it's really important that we field a team of moderators, and that's really understaffed now. So to have you just go to somebody on the opposing side, I'm not sure that will go well. But one thing that works for us very well at the center is to sometimes kind of aggressively bore people by saying, Halloween costumes. Okay. For the next half hour, we're going to discuss the history of Halloween and the evolution of Halloween costumes over the last 50 years. Some people will have gone to sleep at that point, which is good. They will get rested, and that'll be better for their tranquility. But if we can think of Halloween costumes as occasions of controversy in our present moment, and then back up on that in time and think about the larger history of events where people who are staid and pedestrian and prosaic and predictable occasionally go wacky and do things that are batty. If we could put that in there with April Fool's Day and so on, and just think about the larger picture of these holidays, when we come back to the present, we would have different footing. And I think that would be a better conversation from having bored some members of the audience and had a few young people discover that they would like to be historians from hearing this interesting discussion. At this moment, I am not versed in the history of Halloween, so I'm blessedly going to stop here.
I don't know anything about that particular incident, but let me just briefly say that to the general question, my center would be delighted to collaborate on conversations of that sort. We've already done some work of that. We've collaborated with the CU Dialogues program, which is interested in having those kinds of conversations and facilitating them. And they've been very keen to work with us on ventures. And so anyone out there who's got kind of concrete ideas about ways to make that happen, we'd be a very willing partner with that sort of thing. As regards the particulars of your example, as I say, I'm not familiar with it, but I will say it's important to understand that some people are simply trying to cause offense as part of their political activities. And this is not distinctive of the right. This is a grand old tradition of the left as well, to deliberately, go out and try to offend people and shock them out of their attitudes. How well it works is up for grabs and may depend from case to case. But if you're dealing with folk that are positively trying to be offensive and provocative, then dialogue may not be the way forward. But if you're dealing with people that did not intend to cause offense, then there may be room for dialogue.
Both of you in your response to that seem to value moderation and collaboration as an ends to that kind of discourse. But how do then we respond to the Chancellor very openly rebuking the President's actions and his words on several occasions? I mean, is that my dean reified those messages and supported the Chancellor? Is that wrong-headed? Should the Chancellor have had some intervention, or should he have talked to people before he'd said those things? Specifically about transgender people as well as DACA. Yeah,
I'm aware that some of the causes that have been endorsed at the administrative level and at the level of faculty government have caused concern to other parts of campus that have thought, hold on, why is the university taking a stand on this purely political sort of issue? And I think it's very difficult, because I think when an administrator does take a stand on an issue like that, or a faculty governance group does take a stand on an issue like that, the thought is that this somehow transcends a question of politics, and this goes to some kind of fundamental value on which it is appropriate for universities to take a stand. And I think there are instances like that where even if an issue is politicized in a certain sort of way, I think there can be issues where it's appropriate for a university or for a faculty within a university to stand up and say, look, we draw a line here, this is unacceptable. We, as a group, or I, as the leader of this university, find this sort of thing unacceptable. I think that can happen. I think it's very, very hard to know where to draw that line, because if you are dealing with political questions, then almost by definition, it becomes a partisan sort of matter. So I think it's very dangerous, and I think administrators and faculty speaking collectively should be extremely conscious of those complexities and should worry about it a lot before speaking out.
I'll just say that as a teacher, I do feel I'm obligated to watch the group of students and make sure that no one is feeling unwelcome there. And on that count, a transgender student, my obligation as a teacher to make sure that that person doesn't feel personally unwelcome there, and so I would watch for that. This is quite a different activity. I have student gatherings at my house, and if anyone would like to come sign up for those and come join us, it's only 5 blocks away. Once I had a public official who has a controversial job in the state government as our guest speaker, and I had told him he could speak frankly and openly in front of the students about what it is like to have a controversial position. As I stood at the door and people were coming into my house, I found that a faculty member had invited a person who was an attorney who was suing our public official who was going to be speaking frankly and unguardedly at my house. So that's the only time when I asked somebody to leave. I asked that attorney to leave. And that's, I don't like that moment. It's a person who's been nice to me ever since then, but I don't know why I would be, because that was quite a rude thing to do. But I felt like I can't do that. For this thing to work as a conversation, well, I mean, we can cancel the speech and we'll just sit around and chat. We could do that. But I have on one occasion thought, I have lost the capacity for the students to profit from an unguarded conversation by having another person there. So that would be one place where I'm pleased to say that I was not sued by the ACLU for that, so that's really a comfort to me. But I see those moments where, as the host, and a chancellor on his best days is a host for a group of people, may have to make some of those choices about where to take a stand. So I feel like I shall reach out soon to that attorney and take him to lunch or something to make up for that. Oh, she's got it.
So I have more of a comment that I've observed. Like Patti, I started out, my dad was a Marxist. I was raised Marxist, atheist, Freudian. I am now an interfaith minister. I don't like labels. I really eschew them because we're all human beings. And I think if we look back at the history of this country, this divide has always existed. It's kind of gone like this over time, weaved in and out. There were people around the time of the American Revolution who were calling for the liberation of the slaves. But those parts of history, they get obscured a little. I'm sorry about this microphone. One of the things that has occurred to me over time, and first of all, I want to thank you for having a conservative center. I really think dialogue is the only way we're going to get to any kind of civility, back to any kind of civility. But I was raised by somebody who just hated conservatives. I mean, he had friends who were conservatives, but they were bad people, and people who believed in God were bad people. And over the course of my life, luckily, I've gotten to know lots of people of different faiths, of no faith, people of different religious and political and economical backgrounds. And there is a common ground for us all. And one of the things that I think we need to do is get back to the common ground. And what is that? This country is an amazing place. It's founded on amazing principles. And we lose sight of what it is because we get so busy being individually invested in emotional outcomes. And I'm not saying it's easy, it's really hard. And as an interfaith minister, I have this difficulty too, talking to people. My best friend's Jewish, she married a Muslim, but there are people who hate Muslims and people who hate Jews. And how do you have that conversation and keep open enough not to beat somebody up just because they haven't been educated in a way that helps them understand that people are different and individual and unique, and those unique attributes contribute so much. So having grown up in an era of affirmative action and legislation, I think legislation is important because it reminds us that civility is an important thing and that human beings have equal protection under the law, theoretically at least. But then what we really need, legislation doesn't do the full job. We need education. We need to understand. Legislation clearly has not done the full job of what I think it was intended to do coming out of the 60s, 70s. And what it has done in part is polarize people. So I'm not opposed to legislation. I think beating people up should be criminally punished. I think hate speech, on one hand, we have freedom of speech. On the other hand, we don't want to have to talk about each other with hatred. It's not constructive. So my two comments are, one, we need to educate each other about each other, no matter what our differences, because we're never going to find a commonality, a community, a nation, a world that can work together if we don't do that. But on the other hand, we have to be willing to be open and not allow, like my father's anger, for example, that still permeates my sister's views. She's all about those rich people over there. Well, they're people who inhabit this world too. And I don't necessarily agree with what some people do, and I don't like monopolies. I was raised Marxist after all. But I also think that there's room for free expression, free markets, free spirit, but we have to learn civility.
Over here. Did somebody right over here have a question that we can ask up if that person left? Oh, good. Okay. Here. Thank you.
And this will have to be our last question.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate that, especially in light of the comments and the incitement to violence by Maxine Waters against conservatives, anybody in the Trump administration, telling them that they're not welcome anywhere. The grocery store, the supermarket, the gas station, etc. Eric Holder being asked, well, what do we do when people are down? Do you help them? He said, no, you kick them. And then the riot the other night against Tucker Carlson's home. As a conservative, I'm outnumbered here, but I appreciate this effort to be more inclusive, and I appreciate you, Dr. Pasnau, in your efforts with the Conservative Scholar Program. And I just ask people to try and have more civility and to talk more. And, don't kick me because I'm a conservative, because I have the right to my own free speech, which is definitely being squelched in this environment these days. Any comments?
I think that's well said. Thank you very much for your comments, and we've got to bring this to a close. I'm glad to talk to anybody afterwards who's got any further questions or concerns. Thank you all very much for coming.